the idea is Jim's going to lead out with his thoughts for quite a while and about his history and ideas and the movement for civil rights, but also the uh, the nonviolent movement. And so I just want to say that uh, Jim has oh, by the way, Jim, just as an introduction, everybody got an idea of linking one of or more videos that I gave them the links on. There were like 3 of them. And so some of the history that from the very beginning with you in those videos gave us kind of a little bit of an introduction, but we are so blessed to have you with us. And we'd like to hear a lot of the history about your life. And in fact, real quick, there was uh, in your history, before you came to California Pacific Conference, there was one of the leaders that helped, and it was Debbie's mother-in-law, and Debbie's husband, there's Debbie. Debbie's husband, Steve, died of ALS, but we have made a special relationship going forward to her mother-in-law at the time. And her name was Fisk. And do you remember that name? She was on the committee, Carlene Fisk, that helped bring you out here to CalPAC.
No, the connection is that she worked for Owen Gear.
That's it.
And Owen Gear was one of the people who is evidently involved in you coming in. She told us the story. So she's also the daughter-in-law of Louis Fisk, who was a minister in our conference. That's a name that you may remember. But it was just fun to hear this story from my mother-in-law, from my first husband, of the history of you when you came to California kind of quietly, evidently, during that time. So that was kind of cool.
Okay, thank you.
So Jim, you're on to give us some of your understanding in terms of background too, as to what led you to do the work with Martin Luther King and others for this country with regard to racism. So I thought some of your early background that led you down that road was extremely interesting. So it's yours. Welcome.
So you're not sticking to the script.
I said about the first half hour, we talked about that you would be talking to us about your background, about some important things with regard to the chapter that really you thought chapters were good, and just your thoughts in general about what we read and discussed. And then at the end of that, our folks here and we'll have some questions that we would like to pose with you. But you have the stage to start. However you want to go, we're here. So you're on.
Well, we have only 60 minutes.
Right.
And how I can best serve you and help you is a part of my dilemma of my thinking as I come to this group. I have not read Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. He, of course, also wrote another book on the ideas of the history of racism in the United States that received the National Book Award. And so as a young scholar, I've forgotten what his age is, at American University, he's made a pretty fine reputation as a scholar and writer. from what I've read of your Dan's um, offering to me, he's doing pretty much of a sociological analysis, an academic analysis of racism. And this is not to dismiss it or undermine it in any ways, because he's offering new ways of looking at this issue in the United States. Um, he is saying it's not enough. He has said that it's not enough to be um, um, a person who says I'm not a racist. One has to be an anti-racist, and, and with that thesis, I have a large measure of agreement with him. Um, to be able to say that we're not racist is, I think, probably um, a good thing. Um, but it's also like saying I'm not a sinner from the biblical perspective. From the biblical perspective, or from the Jesus perspective, I don't. Any of us, I doubt seriously if any of us are able to say I am not a sinner, because we know so much better about who we are and what our lives have been. But I do agree with him that it's not enough to be against war. It's bitterly important to see war as sin. And then it's very important to be committed to removing the causes of such monumental sin as war and violence. To not be aware of the causes, superficial and root causes, and do not be committed to the eradication of the causes, is to allow one to continue actually to be one who supports various forms of violence. And I think the same thing is true in terms of racism. Um, to not be committed to changing that history in our lives and all is critical. And I think that's what Kendi is trying to push us to, the positive work that helps us to eliminate the causes of racism, which are many. It is like much of our human lives, racism is extremely critical ideology and structure of wrongdoing. And one does have to have the insight to see what some of those issues are and to begin to work against them. I have actually um, been a resistor to all forms of racism since at least being 4 years of age, when I first met personally racist insults and racist hostility from a source that surprised me. I grew up in Massillon, Ohio, which is in the northeastern corner of Ohio, about 34, 50 miles south of Cleveland, somewhat southwest of Cleveland, but very much under the Cuyahoga County huge urban area, an industrial area when I was there growing up in that city. Um, and in Massillon, Ohio, my father was pastor of St. James AME Zion Church. And we lived on Tremont Street. Tremont Street and Erie Street intersected And in that general area, it was a highly mixed housing area. There were probably, I learned later, maybe 10% of the community were black people, and 90% were of European descent. And for the most part, there were no slums. We lived generally across the small city, 29,000 people maybe, and we played together. We grew up together. We ran the same streets, and at age 4, one of these playmates that lived in the same block of me, and I don't remember his name, but we were playmates. I remember sizable numbers of us sometimes in the summer months, running the fields, following the creek that ran through alongside parallel to Tremont Street, running up to the railroad tracks, looking at the Tuscarawas River, and sometimes going up to watch the trains go by on the tracks that were maybe 2 blocks away from our home on Tremont Street. And one day in my 4th year, as age 4, before I'd started school, one of these boys that we played with almost daily, he and I were together playing in an empty lot that was in the same block where we lived. And suddenly he hauled off on racist epithets. And I don't remember what I tried to do, but I do remember we had a fight then and there on the spot. Now, we were friends, we were neighbors. Eventually, we started the 1st grade together at Lauren Andrews Junior High School, which was about 6 blocks west of us, rather, where we lived. Um, but that was my first exposure to racial epithets. And as I look back upon it, I know it was the beginning of my own awakening to the fact that as a black boy, uh, born in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, to a Methodist pastor father, I began to see racism as a fierce enemy of mine. Um, it was, first of all, a spiritual affair. That is, the experience of being in my family and in the St. James Church where Dad pastored was an experience of having a great sense of my being alive and being a gift of God, that life, and that it was an essential thing for my very being. I grew up with a deep sense of self love as well as love for all neighbors. And that sense of love for my neighbors became more acute as I hit high school, where I met some of my first Jewish friends in high school and discovered anti Semitism. Made a commitment in high school that I would not be a religious bigot, that the religion of Jesus, I had learned it and was studying it through the books of the New Testament, that I not only would be resistant to every form of racism and racist laws, unjust, unfair laws, that I would also be opposed to every form of religious bigotry. And I met in high school both Jewish, but then also Roman Catholic friends who had a hard time practicing their Roman Catholicism in a public school, which is a very, very good school, Washington High in Massillon, Ohio. So in that period of time, I recognized that I had religious bigotry to resist intellectually, inwardly, and outwardly, as well as racism and segregation. And so that meant that I've always been extremely grateful uh, for having been born in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, raised pretty largely in Massillon, Ohio, with a religion that was non-dogmatic and non-creedal and rooted more in the gift of life itself and the gift of love and the gift of the potential to achieve many purposes that I felt at an early age God was leading me to accept and to follow. So I want to start, however, in a second place because the Kendi book and the Kendi approach is, while in many ways personal and essential, it is much more of an academic approach to the issue of racism. And my approach to the issue of racism is much more rooted in the scriptures, especially uh, the prophets Isaiah and Micah and others, but also critically Jesus of Nazareth. So I want to propose another way of looking at this. That is through the book of Mark, beginning with the 28th verse, the 12th chapter, which is the pericope of uh, the first commandment by Jesus, where a scribe asked Jesus, "What is the first commandment?" The first commandment, of course, is a major conversation in first century Judaism because the Pharisees represented a reform movement because they, among others, practicing Jews in that first century, felt that it was a pretty heavy order to remember, as some Jews sought to do, memorize 500 or more principles or laws that they were to follow in the conduct of their religious life. And it is a scribe, that is, a person who interpreted the law both in business and in the synagogues and in Jewish practice, the Torah, who asked Jesus the question, "What is the first commandment?" And as I've said, it was a burning issue. It was not a dead issue. It was a primary issue. It's caused some Christians to get involved in a belief system that says, well, law has no grace in it, and is unnecessary, and it's only by grace that we're saved, which, looking at the Bible as a whole, as a Christian document or as a Jewish document, law is a form of grace, and listing one's own life's principles is a healthy exercise for trying to focus one's heart and spirit in the right direction. In any case, in that 12th chapter of Mark, Jesus confirms that he is, in one sense, a follower of the Torah and of the Hebrew Bible, not as an agency that predicts Jesus, which in my judgment is nonsense. I've heard evangelists say, well, there are 900 references to Jesus in the Old Testament. Well, one of my practices of prayer and meditation has been to read the Bible from cover to cover. Maybe start in the first chapter of Genesis and the last chapter of Revelations. Maybe start in the book of Psalms and go in both directions, sometimes starting with the four Gospels. But this has been one of my continuous practices to this very day. And as I hear from that practice, and as I can say truthfully, that I've read every word of the Bible, even when it was boring me to death, boring me to anxiety in certain passages, certain books, that has been to this very day one of my continuous habits of prayer, of meditation, reflection, knowledge, and making the Bible very important to my thinking and to the way in which my own faith is developed. Therefore, as I understand this, that a person who's in the Jewish Christian trains of thinking, Old Testament or New Testament, is called to accept the principle to love God with heart, and soul, and mind, and strength, capacity, with all the capacity that the gift of life offers, and to love the neighbor as you love yourself. So I maintain that one cannot take the religion of the religions, in one sense, of the Bible and the great teachers of the Bible, and then become either a male chauvinist or sexist, or pretend that sexism and domination of the women is God's will, or racism, or violence, or what I call American plantation capitalism, which produced slavery and produced the ideology that working people should not have a fair share of the wages and benefits so that their lives can be made, that they can make their lives and their children and their families sustainable, and that they can also then be influential in the many kinds of groups to which we belong, especially, of course, including a local congregation of the Christian faith. I maintain that that guidance from the scriptures and from Jesus does not allow us to harbor any form of despising other people of any stripe or for whatever reason, even if we think they are sinners in a fashion that is despicable. That 12th chapter paragraph does not allow us to become people who allow a society to despise some set of our fellow citizens for whatever reason. And so in that sense, I personally have a tremendous amount of confidence because I began studying nonviolent struggle in my freshman year in college when I read the autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi. And I knew then that what my mother and father had encouraged me to practice and live in the life of Jesus could also be called nonviolence. Because fundamentally, Gandhi defined nonviolence as soul force. That is to say, that as human beings, we have an enormous, untapped source of power in the very gift of life. And it is Gandhi who said that if the human race ever discovered the creative energy of the universe out of which we have come, we would be so amazed at the way in which our communities and families and our nation's agendas could be changed and transformed. So I maintain that from the point of view of Jesus, those of us of the churches who have issues with other people need to become uncomfortable with those issues and make certain that we understand that the discomfort is not in them, the discomfort is in us, in our own lives, and that our discomfort may mean that God is working with us to help us be transformed into the image and likeness of God, which of course represents the way creation has sought to make us. So racism is one of the great denials of the life and work and religion of Jesus of Nazareth. It contradicts, and I do not blame any of us in the United States today for racism. We've inherited it. Its structures of injustice and torture are not structures that we have created in our generation. We've inherited them. The violence against people of color is a historic violence that stretches back probably to 1619 in that early 17th century. And so when Black Lives Matters, um, Black Lives Matter has helped to create a 2020 where there have been over 7,700 demonstrations, largely nonviolent, not peaceful, but nonviolent, where their agenda for the country is that no USA citizen should suffer injury or death at the hands of our police, that our police are for the purposes of helping us enforce living life by both the spirit and the letter of the many, many laws that now, as a nation, as a people, both locally and nationally, we have accumulated. So I maintain that the religion of Jesus does not allow people of the church to despise any other person or persons or groups of people for whatever reason we think we may despise them, which, for my mind, is another pathway for fighting racism that is quite different from the academic analysis that Brother Kendi, and an excellent analysis that Brother Kendi has offered us. And so I'll state that thesis again, that to discover, to be um, magnetically drawn to a religion of Jesus, or to the religion of Jesus, is to launch your life in the direction of love that is creative and active and powerful, and that embraces all humankind. So we of the church take a different approach to fighting sexism, racism, violence, plantation capitalism. We take the approach of our own transformation that enables our eyes to be open to where is reality in our society, to see the torment of too many of our citizens of all kinds, to see economic disorders that need to be repudiated, to recognize that everything does not go in our society, that what has to go in our society, what has to become reality in our society, is that the society makes life more accessible for every boy and girl who is birthed, every boy, girl, baby birthed anywhere in our land. And that's therefore another way of understanding the movement that I call the Martin Luther King Rosa Parks movement. People lump it as a civil rights movement. I maintain, however, that you need to take a sharper look at it, because some church historians have called the Martin Luther King Rosa Parks struggle a struggle of the Black church, a missional work to change the temperament of the land. Uh, Other historians, like one like John Meacham, that's often on a television person, John Meacham claims that the movement of the 1950s, 60s, that I call the Martin King Rosa Parks movement, um, is second only to the revolutionary movement of the country from 1765 to 1776, July 4th, with the Declaration of Independence. John Meacham says that Our movement in the United States was comparable only to that 10 years before July 4th, 1776, because it sought to make inequality uh, uh, a lost cause, and to make liberty for all and justice for all and equality for all a major framework, a major characteristic of our society, which they have never been. And so I think the last word I need to say is that my own life and work has been primarily as a pastor. That's what I was called, and it's out of the framework of 5 congregations that I've served in Ohio, Tennessee, and California, where I've tried to put to work the religion of Jesus, or the gospel of Jesus, as a living, attractive challenge to the way we live our lives and the way we use our lives. And that I don't call that peaceful, I call it nonviolent entirely. And so it is true that the late Congressman John Lewis called me the architect of the nonviolent movement in the United States. But all I was trying to do in the 50s and 60s was indeed to translate the religion of Jesus into practical, theoretical terms that would help us improve the society in which we live, family, the workplace, the community. And so even now, that continues to be what I try to do in my work. I do agree entirely with Kendi that the structures of racism, the ideologies of racism, must be dismantled and must be replaced, in my mind, with the structures of compassion, the structures of truth, the structures that are accessible to every person in the United States, the structures that enable us to appreciate God's gift. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that all are endowed with certainly unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think that is a historic scripture that reflects the religion of our Bible at its best, which is why I maintain that it's an essential missional project with 2 sides to it. One, dismantling the old that sows the seeds of despising, thus leaving space for the emergence of lifestyles and life's works that reflects the great gift of life itself. So in the 50s and 60s, as a pastor of congregations, I was active many campaigns that helped to change the face of the nation. In California, for an example, in as late as 1960, in California, you had signs up north of Los Angeles in Glendale that said that Jews should not be in this city. You are not allowed here. You also had signs on the borders in Glendale, and I'm only naming one city. There were other cities that had the same thing, that had signs which said that the Negro should not allow the sun to set on him in Glendale. These are actual signs came out of this un um, what's the word? This unthoughtful thing that we call racism. Those signs are gone, and in fact, such signs in restaurants or motels or skating rinks or theaters are now unconstitutional. I open a drugstore with a lunch counter. I care for obtaining the medicines that people need that are both prescribed and then over the counter. I serve all kinds of, I sell all kinds of items in that drugstore. People thought, perhaps in the 16th century, that when I opened a store, a drugstore, I could do with it what I want to do with it. But in the 20th century, the Supreme Court said that you cannot do what you want to in that drugstore. If it's a drugstore open to the public, you have to have the proper licenses from the city government. If there are health requirements that you must preserve and cleanliness requirements that you must observe, those are constitutional. But it is unconstitutional to have signs that says that you will not serve or treat equally certain kinds of your customers. That's now unconstitutional, even though it came out of our past and was thought to be the right of an owner. uh, uh, Unanimous decisions in the mid 20th century has said that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights applies to all the residents of the United States of America, including residents who are undocumented. That the work of documentation, the work of helping new immigrants, is the work of the society, and not the responsibility alone of the undocumented person. The society should be aggressive and positive in its effort to see to it that students who've come to study, who study and get their degrees and then begin to work or start to work when they first come and continue to work, but do not have the proper papers, have not registered properly with the State Department, with the USA government, should be encouraged by the society to get those papers or to leave. But that it's the responsibility of the governments to see to it that people have the right documents that they need to live in a particular society. It's the responsibility of the government to do that work and to create channels which allow that work to be completed in every local level. So I'm saying all that to say that I've seen my own work both as being consonant with the gospel of Jesus and consonant with uh, uh, the origins of our nation. And for me, it's been a great work. I do not call myself a civil rights person. I prepared for and have trained and worked to be a pastor of people. And it's a work that I continue to enjoy even now, so that I do get calls like today. This day was open except for this afternoon, except for today, for 7 p.m. tonight. But it turned out I had to do a committal service at a cemetery for a family out of Holman Church, and all. So the day filled up. So this is my last appointment for today. So thank you for having me. I don't know if that's been helpful or not, um, but uh, a study of racism by all Americans in, is my mind a critical piece of work. We have to become much better informed about racism. And I say in my own congregations that when in my preaching across the decades, I have said that if we black folk are to rid the nation of racism, we must also rid the nation of male chauvinism and sexism, because these cruelties are connected with one another in the spiritual poison that they offer. And I've often said that if we're going to eradicate racism and sexism, we're going to have to deal with violence, because the poison about human beings is almost the same in racism, in sexism, as in violence. Violence looks with um, um, great hostility on human beings, because they say that too many human beings who do not understand and cannot live by reason or by the spirit uh, or by the management processes within a community, they only understand violence. So that is to despise the creation, the human creation of God. And I then add that racism, sexism, violence, and plantation capitalism, that is the use of economic patterns that impoverish human life and decrease accessibility to life, are all connected to each other. And you cannot be for working to dismantle one if you do not work to dismantle all of them in our society, and that all of them being dismantled is the task that will allow our country to have a burst of freedom and equality and justice that we can only imagine. I feel that way often about my own life, that in trying to pursue the course that I have pursued, there is a deep sense of confidence, of trust in creation, of trust in the God of creation, of trust in the infinite, unimaginable possibilities yet of life itself and of human beings and the human race. Too long, too much.
Jim, right now, I
See if
know,
we can engage in some questions or comments.
yeah, that's exactly right. So I want to open it up before I say anything else. I want to open up for any of you who please have been thinking about questions for Jim now that we have. So ask away, please.
Dr. Lawson, thank you so much for meeting with us. It's so inspirational to hear your story and to hear what inspires you. My question is just that. What are you reading now, or what inspires you? You talked about Gandhi and of course the Bible and Isaiah and specific passages. But for my teenage daughters, what are some things that you find inspirational today?
What are some of the things that I find what?
Inspirational.
Oh, well, of course, I still find the scriptures inspirational and important for me. I still read a number of biographies um, that are important. I try to read everything I can about Martin King, Gandhi, and Eleanor Roosevelt. I've had wonderful talks over the last 12 months with Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. I think that she is very much, as a Roman Catholic, committed to the kingdom of God on earth. She's in a strange place politically, but she tries to keep alive that kind of faith. And I've had the privilege also of being with Kamala Harris and think that she represents the kind of woman that needs to emerge into national and international leadership in various ways. My primary theologian these days has been and is various members who are various scholars who counted themselves back in the 20th century, 1990 and onward, of 1985, towards the end of the century, who consider themselves members of the Jesus Seminar Group. People like Marcus Borg, John Dye, Croson. These men have written, that whole school have written some marvelous documents on the Bible, on Jesus. I think of Bruce Chilton's book on Rabbi Jesus. That's now probably 20 years old. So much of my reading continues to be analysis of U.S. current issues, as it tends to be both biblical and biographical. I do have a thesis that bipartisan politics is not what we need. We need the politics of the Declaration of Independence, the politics of the preamble, especially of the Constitution, that calls us to an astounding understanding of life and of the political struggle. In the Christian churches, we don't need bipartisan politics. We need to be trying to work on the politics of Jesus and the politics of God. And that's one of the reasons I'm contented with, in that sense, with where I've come from and who I am, because I've found in Black churches and I've found in the Black community a constant push to dismantle the wrong and to allow the right to emerge, to get rid of the old stuff that is hateful and hurtful and torturous, so that it can be replaced by models that are more faithful to equality and to liberty and justice for all. And a great number of us in the United States, of all complexions and all creeds, do not have a deep awareness that the history of our country has produced some structures that are simply wrong and has to be replaced. And part of the teaching of the scripture that we also tend to ignore is that is important to nonviolent struggle is that you cannot overcome the wrong with a new wrong. You can't overcome evil using the ideologies of the pragmatics of evil. You have to find somehow how the good will dissolve the evil and challenge the evil and allow the good to emerge. And that's not a pessimistic view at all. It's a hopeful view, because all across much of Europe, the political parties for much of the 20th century, whether they call themselves conservative socialists or Christian socialist conservatism, it's strange names of the political parties in the nations of Europe. But all those parties are of the mind that the budget of their central government should be rooted in the well-being of their families. Almost all of them. They've had a participation in 2 wars, but almost all those governments, and a number of the governments, are led by what are called Christian socialist parties, whatever that is. Angela, um, oh shoot,
Davis?
no, the Prime Minister of Germany,
Merkel.
Merkel, Angela Merkel. Her party is the Christian Conservative Party, but her party has been a forthright party for helping the quality of life all across Germany rapidly advance against all odds. Um, so I maintain that through Europe, God is working to show how governments can make government responsible for making certain that there is access. So much of Europe has almost eradicated illiteracy because of the money they put into public education. All across Europe, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Denmark, Norway, Spain, they have put in the last 67, 80 years a great amount of emphasis upon quality education for every child. And in doing this, they have in large measure eradicated illiteracy, whereas illiteracy in our nation continues, especially among males, which is an interesting thing. I've not looked at this recently, but illiteracy, especially among men, all complexions of men, has tended to increase over the last 50 years, slowly but steadily. Um, you might want to look that up somewhere and see how literate we are as a society. We have not done the work in eradicating, just that issue alone, which is more than education, is giving people the ways to think and understand and assess and value things, value positions, so that they can make the better choices for themselves in a great variety of ways. So anyway.
Okay, thank you. That's opportunity for somebody else to ask a question. Thanks, Slade. And if your daughters, either one of them, have a question, hey, the floor is open to everybody. So Zoe and Olivia, you can have one too. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
I don't have a question. I just am so thankful and honored that you took the time to be with us this evening. I know it's later there than here, and you've had a long day, but thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Well, that's the pastor's vocation. It is to be with people one-on-one.
Well, never end. That never ends.
Yeah,
huh?
that's right. Yeah, that doesn't stop.
I'll jump in with one here, a comment from one of our chapters, chapter 16, because Jim, one of the things that we're really struggling with now individually after we've done the course, and it was academic, and we did, I know some of us, most of us, there are times we'd read one paragraph 3 or 4 times to try to figure it out.
Oh yes, that's right.
And but now we're to the point of how to be an anti-racist is kind of a call to action for us. What do we do with what we learn? And I'm interested in this out of chapter 16, what your thoughts are. It said, he wrote, the problem of race has always been at the core, the problem of power, not the problem of immorality or ignorance. Racist policymakers drum up fear of anti-racist policies through racist ideas, knowing if the policies are implemented, the fears they circulate will never come to pass. Once they clearly benefit, most Americans will support and become the defenders of the anti-racist policies they once feared. We have to be courageous to be anti-racist. Courage is the strength to do what is right in the face of fear. As the anonymous philosopher tells us, I gain insight into what's right from anti-racist ideas. I could gain strength from fear. So any response to that particular power issue about racists being in power positions so that they can continue their anti-racism and get some justification for their policies?
Well, I tend to agree and disagree. I think that is true. Racism in the United States has allowed white supremacy to sense itself as being more powerful, and then the racist patterns of life. Just another piece of history. In the 19th century, there were black ball players in the National Baseball League as it began. With the destruction of the Reconstruction, and then with the establishment of segregation and black codes, black laws, shackle black people, the National Baseball League terminated all the black ball players who played baseball in that league. So it wasn't that, 1947, that Mr. Branch, I can't think of his full name, of the Dodgers, who happened to be a Methodist layman, determined that as owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers at the time, he was going to go ahead out of conscience and begin the desegregation of the Brooklyn Dodgers, which he did. 1947. I emphasize that he happened to be a Methodist layperson. Grant Trickey. So racism is a matter of the uses of power, but it also is ideological. It is the way in which we can substitute a sort of belief idea, a sort of belief system for human experience and cling to that belief system. So I maintain that we have to continue to do the work of theologizing and philosophizing. We have to do the work of helping people sketch out and examine their ideas. We have to help people see the usefulness of Scripture in that task, as well as developing powers that can defeat sexist, chauvinistic powers, that can transform them, change them. So I think we have to work both on the inside and the outside. We human beings, I think, must do both. We cannot afford just the external task. So it's not just a question of power, it's also a question of spiritual and moral power, the power of love, the power of compassion to embrace human community and to cause the human community to become more illustrative of compassion in the way in which it functions from day to day, become more loving. So I think both and still necessary.
And by the way, most of our folks probably don't know, but Jackie Robinson in baseball was youth and young adult in Pasadena at one of our Methodist churches.
Yes, at Downs, and let's see, it's Downs, no, it's Scott United Methodist.
Scott United Methodist.
Methodist Church in Pasadena. That's right. The Robinson family were members of that church. Yeah.
That's right.
That's right.
Dory, did you have something?
Oh, I was thinking, I listened to your TED Talk, and you had talked about leaving your graduate studies in order to join Martin Luther King Jr. Isn't that correct? What?
That's right.
what enticed you to, I mean, what was in your soul or your feelings that it must have been very strong?
Well, one, in 57, when Martin King and I first shook hands and had our first face-to-face conversation, that event in my mind was not something that I did. I knew by 1952 that we could have a Jesus-oriented movement for justice in this country that would impact and change the nation. I knew that by 1952. After having seen how Gandhi had translated religion into nonviolent struggle and how he had collected tactics from the past. For an example, most Christians do read over the first chapter of the first book of Exodus, where in that first chapter of Exodus, we see perhaps the oldest written account of civil disobedience. The midwives of Egypt were ordered by Pharaoh to see to it that every slave baby boy born would be born dead. And their names are in that first chapter of Exodus. The midwives did not verbally tell Pharaoh, we're not going to do it, which makes perfect sense. They simply did not do it. And hence in that same chapter, then, Moses is born and has a chance for life. I'd done that kind of study and examination, and then read Gandhi, as I said earlier, in 1947, realized he was onto something. So I was anticipating a movement. So as Martin King and I visited, and he realized that my own background and work, he simply told me, you have to come south and you have to do it immediately. And I decided that it was indeed God's word for my life. So there's no use quarreling with it. I have to arrange to do it. And so I, from then on, figured out how I could manage to make that break in my graduate work and head south. So I was able to make that decision as a sign, as an act of obedience to what I knew to be God's purpose.
Interesting.
So last chance for some of you folks. I want to make sure that you don't leave. The time is getting close to the end here. I want to make sure that you at least don't leave here and saying that was so incredible. But there's that one question I wanted to ask, and I wish I could have asked it. Yeah. So anybody have one of those?
You were talking about like the Black Lives Matter movement and all the protests. And I want to know, what are some ways that you think would be, or what are some things you think would be the most impactful to change, to help that movement, or ways that what we can do to help make a change?
Look around your community and see if there's a Black Lives Network there, and go to one of the monthly meetings. Many of those networks, there are only 16 or 20 of them in the country, but where they exist, and one exists in Los Angeles, go to their monthly meeting, which is an open meeting, and hear and see, and work on your own answer. Because in those meetings, monthly meetings, are open meetings for anyone in this society that wants to be a part of it. I do want to say one thing about, which I have not said, about the demonstration. This has been the largest. This year has been the largest such demonstrations that the nation has ever had. And they've been largely nonviolent. The violence is being caused by the police coming out of the society, because our society is a very violent society, one of the most violent in the world. And also, there is a looter group, which I met in the 60s, that thinks that burning and looting is a part of movement, which it is not. But you cannot dissuade them, because I've talked till I was bone weary on my feet in Nashville, in Los Angeles, in Olympic Washington, in Olympic Washington, in Boston, Massachusetts. I've had 40 or more years of kinship with some of them in Los Angeles. Then the other violent group is the anarchists. They're largely white, young men mostly. They dress often from head to toe in black. And they have the notion that revolution requires violence, which is nonsense. And I've talked with them again in various places, including LA over the years. They cannot be dissuaded. They are conventional, cultural people of a society. Violence is the most powerful power they maintain. It's an ideology, it's not real. Because you can talk about the cultural revolutions we've had, the revolutions in music, the revolutions in dance, a great variety of revolutions in physics and astronomy, many revolutions, many major changes have taken place. So Marx is quite wrong. A revolution does not need to be violent. In fact, violence decreases its capacity to create something new and different that will be more just and more wholesome. The third group that does a lot of violence in the United States are the Antifa group, the anti-fascist group. And there are 2 or 3 reports out, one in the Washington Post in September, which have indicated that the violence really has not come from Black Lives Matter's people or participants. It's largely come from these 3 other groups. And in some ways, they're quite racist. I'll say this to you. They do not like me saying that, but they are quite racist. They're quite male chauvinist. They think as young white men, and they're mostly 18 to 35 maybe, but they think that, and this is true especially of the anarchists, they think that what they do is more important than what we Black people call for and do. They think that they know better than we do how to rid our society of its racism, which in my mind makes them very racist. And they get very upset with me when I tell them that, when I say that to them face to face.
You're muted, Laura.
Laura.
Pastor Lawson, besides yourself, who are the leaders leading up, leading the cause right now, I guess you'd say? Is there any leaders out there?
Oh yes, and many. All right, let me say it another way. The way in which Martin Luther King Jr. Appeared in 1955 and rose to preeminence is one of the great gifts of history, one of the great gifts of God. But what Martin King was able to do could never have been done if there had not been a multiplicity of Black leaders and pastors in places like Nashville and Memphis and elsewhere. Just as an example, if the Black church had not been available, that movement probably could not have happened. And right now, Black Lives Matter must almost always meet in a Black church somewhere, because they can't meet in the boardroom of a big bank building. That's not available. And usually a city hall meeting place is not available. So they have to have meetings where they are invited. And the place that most allows them to meet in Los Angeles is Black churches. I know the pastor of one of the places where the executive committee of BLM in Los Angeles meets on a regular basis, where the executive meeting. So in many ways, the present movement has built and is founded upon the 20th century movement. And that, I think, is the way in which history works. And so there are a lot of local people in Los Angeles. I know there must be at least 30 to 40 people who make up the energy of strategizing and planning for Black Lives Matter in Los Angeles. There must be 35 to 40 people. And at least, and that would be true probably in Nashville and elsewhere across the country.
Thank you.
Okay, as we're ready to close, I was so anxious to get to have Jim share with us. I realized that you all didn't get a chance to just say hello and what's your name. And so why don't we go around and just do that real quick, and then we'll say a final goodbye and thank you to Jim. Dory, why don't you start? And anything else you want to comment about besides your name?
Oh, I'm Dory. Hi, Jim. I'm just wondering, do you ever speak in the LA area? Any of the churches?
Oh, yes, but not right now. Most everything is by Zoom.
No, I mean, well,
yes, every fourth Saturday, Holman United Methodist Church has a workshop, which I coordinate and agitate, from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, the fourth Saturday of every month. And right now we are doing it by Zoom.
yeah, but where, I know it's Zoom, but where is that? I didn't hear the name.
Oh, it was started by Holman United Methodist Church when I was pastor there.
Oh.
And it's continued there because a number of lay people wanted to go on. So that's every fourth Saturday from 9 to 12.
Is that open to others beyond the church?
Yeah, it's open to anyone.
Dory, I can help you connect to that.
Most of the people are not members of the church.
Mm.
And sometimes we have as many as 100. We usually have 30 to 40 on a given Saturday. Sometimes we have as many as 80 or more than 100 people.
Okay, interesting.
And I try to review a history and philosophy and theology of nonviolent struggle. With sometimes there are more and more films that are available that can be used as teaching tools, and I use some of them, as well.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great question. Next introduction, just jump in.
Laura Hahn, and again, thank you so much for coming tonight. I appreciate it. And I too would like to be connected to that Debbie Holman United Methodist.
Yeah, we'll find it.
Okay, thanks. Again, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
And God bless you.
we'll get that link to everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Sue Dumey, and thank you so much for being with us this evening. It's been fabulous, and you've just given me, I might not have any questions, but you've sure given me a lot to contemplate on. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Slade, how about your group?
Yeah, Slade, Zoe, and Olivia, and again, just thank you so much. Really,
Yeah.
a lot to think about, and just really wonderful to hear you tonight. Thank you very much.
Best wishes to all of you.
Kathy,
Kathy.
finally, like Kathy.
I'm Kathy Caton, and thank you again. We studied the book here at the church, and I'm now residing in Palo Alto, and another group is going to be studying it as well. So I'm definitely going to pass on some of the information that you have given us tonight to that group of people as well. Thanks again.
Jim, as we close, you just said a few minutes ago that Dr. Martin King was a great gift of history. And I would like to add, I consider you a great gift of history, and not only history, but of today. I've respected you for all the time that we've known each other and by reputation before. And it's good to get reacquainted. And Debbie and I here, you finally get to meet Debbie on Zoom as the associate pastor. Our lead pastor could not be here.
Yeah.
And but Debbie could. So we thank you, and we will be back in touch with you. Debbie, did you want to say something?
This is the second or third time I've had kinship with Laguna Beach Methodist Church, because I've been there a couple times for community-wide gatherings at a Lutheran church, and also I think at a Methodist church. I can't think what that was, but in that area, this is at least the third time I've met people from Laguna Beach.
Well, Laguna Beach United Methodist Church is a moving and shaking, reconciling community that is outreaching to the community. Laura Hahn, who's on here, is the rockin' president of United Methodist Women, and they are just as active.
Right.
I know that you appreciate what United Methodist Women do.
Oh yeah.
Yes, and it's just a wonderful place to be, and what a privilege to be sitting here with you tonight, with everything you've done, everything that's going on in our world, and we're just so very grateful. Thank you.
Well, I'm pleased to have been here, and it's terrific that you are studying this kind of book.
And I will be in touch with you.
Okay.
We have everybody has made a contribution that you can use in your ministry, and so I'll be in touch with just what the level is. I think you'll be pleased, though. So
I didn't ask for that.
I know you didn't ask for it,
And,
but
and when you called, I said yes,
yes, but
without reservation.
you know, we throw the
I
word
am
blessing
absolutely
around, but tonight you have been a blessing
Oh, well,
for
thank
us.
you. Okay.
And so go in peace, my friend, and continue to do everything that you've been doing for all of your years in ministry and as an incredible human being. So blessings. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.